So this is going to be the first of several presentations on cross-cultural swearing. And the idea here is that I want to look at swearing in different languages and what that can tell us about the culture. And so the way I've done this is I've broken it up according to different taxonomic types. So remember the taxonomy of taboo words that we started the semester with. So we've got profanity, we've got obscenity, scatology, slurs, finality, mortology. Those are the items from the taxonomy. I'm not going to get to all of them, but this is the sort of the organizing principle. And so I've tried to choose a representative language or languages for each one and show how the taboo words in that language can reflect back on the culture and tell us something about the culture of the language. So I'm going to start with profanity, and pigs and tabernacles is what this one's going to be about. You'll get the reference fairly soon. So I'm going to give you a little story. This was when I was in high school. I was on the cross-country team, and there was a guy on the team. He was an exchange student from Italy, and he was a really great guy. His name was Giovanni, and everybody just loved him. He was a really cool guy, very funny, and nothing seemed to faze him. I mean, he was a lousy runner. He really couldn't run very fast. I mean, I wasn't very good, but he was terrible. And he didn't care. That was the great thing about him. He just didn't care. He just was happy to, get to train with us during the week and make jokes and ride on the bus with us, and he didn't really care about the races at all. And of course, as you can imagine, you're a bunch of high school students hanging out with this guy, Giovanni, who became this good friend of ours. We, of course, wanted to know how to swear in Italian, and Giovanni was pretty obliging. And so he said, okay, well, if you want to insult somebody else, call them a stronzo. And so, he would get pretty good at that. He would say, stronzo. And then he said, okay, another one is fica. And then another one is fica. Now, this was my first introduction to the difference between a short consonant and a long consonant. So, fica and fica. And so he taught us these, and he taught us what each one means. So, stronzo means turd, but it's used like asshole. It's a slur. And he taught us fica. You got to imagine Giovanni's accent here. So the fica is ti pusi, and then fica is tu pudidin. Now, I've since learned, given my research interests and being a linguist, I had to look this up. And it turns out that Giovanni must have come from a particular dialect of Italian where fica is actually a taboo word. So he taught us that it means tu pudidin, but he told us that it was a bad word, so it's equivalent to fuck. But in other parts of Italy, it turns out that it's really just a verb, means to put it in. So in that way, it's not a bad word everywhere, but it is in Italy, in this part of Italy where Giovanni grew up. Okay, now, we're feeling pretty good, right? Giovanni's taught us some pretty bad words, right? Fica, fica. We're feeling like he's taught us the worst of the worst. And so then this one day, one of my friends was reading a story in a magazine, and from the context, he was able to figure out that this character who was saying the word porco dio, or the expression porco dio, that he was saying something kind of bad. But he did have no idea what it meant. And so next day he walks up to Giovanni at school and says to him, porco dio. And Giovanni just went crazy. He's like, don't ever say, never say that, don't ever say that. He got very mad at him. He told him that he should never say that. It was a horrible thing to say, and that he refused to tell us what it means. So we're feeling kind of cheated. We thought that he taught us the worst of the worst, fica. And now he's telling us that there's this horrible expression that he won't even translate for us because it's so terrible. So, of course, we're more interested than ever. Now we've got to figure out what it means. And we're a little surprised when we find out that it means pig god. Well, it turns out that there's actually quite a few of these porco or porca expressions. Porca if it's feminine, porco if it's masculine. So there's porco dio, porco madonna, pig Madonna, porco puttana, pig whore, porco Judah, pig Judas, and this odd one, porca vacca, pig cow. Obviously, there's an element of faunality here, of using an animal term, but what was so shocking to Giovanni wasn't the animal term, it was the application of the animal term to religion, to this God. So basically, as I understand it, it's like saying that God is a pig, which is kind of an odd thing to say to my ears in English. Not, I suppose, a somewhat blasphemous thing, but it's not a taboo expression to me. And to my friends growing up in the 1980s United States, it wasn't a very horrible thing to hear, pig God, or God is a pig. But to Giovanni, coming from Italy, this was a terrible thing to say. So clearly profanity had a much larger impact on him, given his upbringing, than it did on me, given my upbringing. Okay, now, turning back to English, I want you to imagine that somebody's really upset and just shouts, tabernacle, or shouts out, baptism of tabernacle, or host of baptism of tabernacle, or chalice of a host of baptism of tabernacle. You probably look at them kind of funny, like, what are you saying? Well, in English, this is kind of nonsense, but in French, the translations, tabernacle, baptême, hostie, and chalice, are actually pretty foul. Although, not for everybody. For the French, they're kind of meaningless and kind of silly. They can't imagine anybody saying that as swear words. But in Quebecois French, these are bad words, and really the worst words. And I've had this confirmed by native speakers more than once, that tabernacle is really one of the worst things that you can say. So if you were to drop something on your foot, you would probably be likely to say tabernacle, and it would be kind of shocking to those around you, perhaps. Clearly, there's a religious element going on here. I should add that tabernacle, to a Catholic background, has a different meaning than it does to most of us in Salt Lake City. In Salt Lake City, we think of it as being that building where the choir performs, whereas in Catholicism, the tabernacle, is the cupboard where you keep the chalice. And so clearly, then there's a difference in that these are clearly religious terms. They're profanity, and it has a stronger impact. And people have argued that the church has held a stronger position in Quebec than it does in the United States. There's no unifying church in the United States, and even in France, where it's a mostly Catholic country, Catholicism isn't as powerful as it once was. And so in France, profanity is not considered terribly taboo today, whereas in Quebec, Canada, it's still a fairly strong taboo. But oddly, the church seems to be losing some of its sway. And so it's kind of interesting that there are young people today growing up knowing that tabernacle is one of the worst things that they can say, but they don't know what it means informatively. And again, I've had this confirmed. I read this first in a magazine article, and I'll give the citation for that in a moment. But I've had this confirmed by native speakers that it's probably fairly common for a native speaker of Quebecois French, say in their teens, who would use tabernacle as a swear word and not know that it refers to the cabinet in Catholic Church. And in fact, there was a campaign from the Catholic Church to kind of reclaim these words. And so there were these big billboards that would say tabernacle on them. And it was kind of shocking, apparently, to see this up on a billboard in big letters, and then underneath it would define it, and it was kind of trying to take it back for the church so that it wasn't just a swear word anymore. I doubt that that's going to be terribly effective in reclaiming words that way, but who knows? I mean, these things can be interesting, how things change and how quickly things can change. All right, so this is our first presentation, looking at profanity and how in different cultures this can have a stronger or a less strong taboo on it. And as we talked about with historical language, profanity was stronger back in English history than it is today. Today it's not as strong, although there's still pockets of English communities, English-speaking communities, where it is still pretty strong. And so you may find that profanity is stronger in some places than in others. For example, I had a student in my class who came from a very religious background, and she refused to say the word God, but she would happily say the word fuck. All right, so here's the citation for that article that I first read from the Washington Post, and then I had some of the ideas that were discussed in the article confirmed by a linguist friend of mine, Sylvain Nouvel, who's a native speaker of Quebecois French.